next speaker I want to ask is Jozef Vasak. I hope I spell your name correctly. Um, you are you're an advisor, and now I need to translate it from my German notes, an advisor on economic policy coordination and the European semester at the Austrian representation of the European Commission here in Vienna. And you studied in Bratislava and Hamburg, and your main issues you work on are economic policy coordination, taxes, job market, competition, structural reform, climate and energy. So almost everything in economics, I guess. So please, the floor is yours. And the question to you was, how do you see the role of Austria in the European perspective, and how could we influence Europe with our even more ambitious climate neutrality goal, climate neutrality by 2040. Please, Jozef.
Yes, good afternoon, ladies and gentlemen. Thank you very much, Mr. Hinterberger, for the invitation and for the introduction of my person. I'm very pleased that I may tell you something about the European climate and energy policy today. As concerns your question, I would say my personal take, I think we can say that, at least from my perspective, Austria is a very constructive, ambitious, and active discussion partner at the EU level in Brussels, is actively contributing to the policy making, and with the very ambitious goals of the current federal government, I think, but also with many practical examples and solutions from the Austrian regions. I think Austria is showing many other member states the way forward. We as the Commission also appreciate the strong support of Austria for the European Green Deal. We also welcome very much the ambitions of the current Austrian government to reach climate neutrality by 2040, and also to fully decarbonize its electricity system by 2030. This will contribute, of course, this will provide an important contribution to achieve the European climate and energy goals. As Mr. Losch already mentioned, we also see indeed that there are many Austrian small and medium-sized enterprises that are very successful in developing, producing and exporting clean technology and environmental innovations. So we see that there are very well positions, you know, in Europe, but also internationally, to benefit from the green transition. But there is a lot that remains to be done at the EU level, but also here in Austria at the national level. We see firmly that now the politics should act. We have very ambitious goals, but there is still a very long way to go. And if you want to achieve the goals, and also if you want to make sure that we use the green transition really also as an economic opportunity. If you would allow me, I also prepared a few charts to show where we are and where we want to go in climate policy. I apologize, it's in German, but I will go through it quickly in English. So where do we stand in climate policy? I think I start directly with this chart, which shows, you know, the trend in the greenhouse emissions in the last 30 years. You can see, and this is this is a good message I want to share with you today. We were able to decouple economic growth from the emissions. You can see that in the last 30 years, the economy grew by more than 60%, whereas the greenhouse gas emissions went down by 23%. So we are not starting from scratch. Our existing policies and measures contributed to the fact that, for instance, energy and industry sectors were able to lower their emissions. Here I would name maybe just few measures: energy efficient standards for building, eco-design measures, of course, the emission standards for cars, and emission trading scheme. This is also very important. These all contributed that we are not starting from scratch. Of course, we also had very ambitious goals for 2020, 2030, but the bad message, the bad news is that this all is not enough. And if we want to achieve climate neutral 2050, we have to do much more in terms of climate policy. And the gap we have to fill shows very nicely this chart. You can see at this chart the trend in the emissions and our forecast under the assumption of existing policies and under the assumption of additional already announced policies, and the gap we have to basically close until 2050. So you see, even with the existing policies and all announced policies until now, we would not reach it. So there's a big gap we need to close. Here, quickly a sectoral overview. You can see that energy and industry actually provided a positive contribution to lower in the reduction of emissions. You can see that, for instance, in the residential and building sector, the emissions are declining at a much slower pace, and in the transport sector, for instance, in the aviation, we must admit that our policies basically were not successful. Here we have failed as European Union, including as Austria. Here two charts which show the current situation in Austria. On the left hand side, you can see that the emissions in the European Union as a whole more or less are at the level. They were able to went down by more than 20%, whereas in Austria you see that they are more or less at the same level as in 1990, and the gap seems to be widening. So EU as a whole being able to lower the emissions, Austria more or less stagnating. On the right hand side, you can see that the biggest challenge is actually the transport sector. You see that the emissions here are higher and much higher than in 1990, and they have been actually accelerating in last 4 or 5 years. So here we see, as a European Commission, actually the biggest potential for reducing emissions in Austria. But this is nothing new. I think this is also properly recognized in the Austrian National Energy and Climate Plan. Of course, transport is important, but all economic sectors have to contribute actively. And this is also why the European Green Deal is covering all important aspects of human and economic activity, from agriculture, food production, environmental policy, protection of the environment, biodiversity, then sectoral policies, energy, circular economy, industry, clean mobility, of course, very important, energy efficiency of buildings, up to the social aspects and social policy aspects of the green transition. Here we are saying, frankly, as the Commission, that the green transition is technologically possible. This is what our analyses are showing, but we should not underestimate the social impacts of the structural changes that will happen in the wake of the Green Deal. And here it is our absolute priority to leave nobody behind. We have to help those people and regions and sectors which are nowadays most dependent on fossil energy. And this is also the reason why we have established the Just Transition Fund. Here you can see actually the main building blocks of the European Green Deal. We will, and we have been already putting forward key initiatives and proposals, altogether 50 under the Green Deal. We have presented already 10 of them since the Green Deal was presented in November 19. And we will continue presenting all necessary measures to implement it. We also say, as part of the Green Deal, that we need additional investment, massive investment. We are saying where this investment could come from, but we are also clearly admitting that only investments from the state, from the public sector, only subventions and grants will not do. This is not enough. According to our analysis, we have to invest 260 billion euro a year if we want to achieve only the existing 2030 targets. So this is what we have from the EU budget, from the national budgets. This is clearly not enough, and we need to mobilize investment from the private sector. That's why it's important that we have this EU taxonomy that provides for clear criteria what are from the climate point of view, positive investments and what is actually only greenwashing. So we need to mobilize private investment. We need to make sure that, because we see there is actually strong demand on the side of investors, on people who want to save for their life. And currently there's a lot of greenwashing, so we need to make sure that with this criteria we actually investment flows in activities that will improve the situation. We also have to improve the framework conditions, because we see that many green investments are slowed down and made impossible due to regulatory obstacles. Or here we see also potential how through regulatory measures we can help. And I would close my contribution with this charge. You are certainly aware that the head of states and governments reached a historic agreement in July. They decided that in the next 7 years we will have the largest ever EU budget, including the next generation recovery plan, for which the EU, in the name of member states, will borrow and the financial markets will issue bonds. And 30% of this 30% of this 1,800 billion of euro has to actually be spent for climate protection measures, investments, and reforms. This is important. This has never been the case. So this is very ambitious. And here, the last aspect I would like to underline is that it is not only important to invest in green transition, but to also bring about structural change. We don't want to, I think Mrs. Koppel mentioned this earlier today, that we don't want to temporarily increase the demand in the economy. We need to bring about structural change that will provide long-term incentives for more environmental friendly economic activity and demand on the side of industry companies, but also us as consumers, as owners of houses, as investors. This is important. We need to couple these investments, which we will finance from the EU budget, from the recovery plan, with structural reforms that will provide for long-term incentives. And this should be also coupled with reforms that not only provide for incentives, but also, as I already mentioned, abolish structural obstacles that prevent investors from completing green projects and green investments. I would stop here, and I apologize, I already talked too much, but I'm happy to take any questions if there are. Thank you.
Thank you very much. Vielen Dank.